Hi, Sean Durham here of Berlin Sincerely. This is about street photography or photography in general. Today I just want to think about two things that are very important to street photographers especially, and that is the idea of why are we doing it as a whole, and secondly, how does the law affect us that are becoming more and more stringent with laws about controlling people, which is not a very nice thing. Here's a little story. Long ago, I went out and I was taking photos early in the morning. I got up early in the morning. I had an analog camera, so a film camera, and I used to go walking around the street at dawn looking for shots. And back then I was a bit younger, and so I could go all day. And I do remember at some point in the day, the sun was brightly shining and it was beautiful, and the shadows on these steps looked fantastic. And I saw this young woman wearing a spring dress, and it looked lovely, but she was sitting on the steps eating an ice cream, and her hair was lightly and gently blowing in the breeze. And it all looked very idyllic, and I just couldn't resist it to take a shot. And I thought, she looks gorgeous and lovely and beautiful, and she was probably 23, 25 years old. And those were the days when if you pointed a camera at a person in public, they would actually just get very like, oh, I must be good looking or something like that. And they would, they'd pose or they'd just grin and carry on walking, but nobody got upset about it. And the thing is, I took a shot of her and it was lovely, and it's long gone. I don't know where it went to. It disappeared. It was printed onto paper, and that was that. And somehow over the years I've lost it. It was a shame. But think of this lovely young woman eating an ice cream, sitting on a step looking so peaceful and lovely in the sunshine. And it must have been springtime, because I do remember very clearly she was wearing this beautiful spring dress that sort of, when the wind touched it, it sort of billowed a little bit and things like this, and so created these lovely folds. After I took the shot, she looked at me and glared, and her personality was quite different to her look. And she really said, where the bloody hell do you think you are, taking a photo of me just like that? I'm just sitting here having ice cream. Leave me alone. And she talked to me like this, and they, now go away and do your thing. And I thought, bloody hell. Being an Englishman, I added a little bit of humour, and I said, I'm really sorry, but Gordon Bennett, are you a school teacher by any chance? And she said, yes, I am. Now go away. And I thought, personality and looks often conflict, and conflicting situations is really what I wanted to speak about. Is the idea that today, unfortunately, laws for all types of things for individual citizens are becoming very, very tight. Now, getting away from that and going into the idea of street photography, 2 points. One, we've got every right to take photos. I don't know, there are countries where it's probably prohibited. There are police officers on the street in Western countries, and especially Western Europe, who are not very well informed about the law. They no longer are given a brief on just go out there and arrest people breaking the law. It's more look for people doing specific things. And one of them in London, it appears to me, is that street photographers who get too close to buildings which are not designated publicly as being something secretive, or ministers being there or anything, often a police officer will approach them and tell them, you can't take photos here. Go away, switch off your camera and disappear. In Berlin, where I live, it's not police officers at all, and police officers will often tell you that, no, you can go around and take photos. You just can't take photos of people's faces. And that's very strictly and understandably prohibited, that people have the right to protect their image, and therefore any idea of street photography as portrait photography is blown out the window. You shouldn't bother. Don't even try. There can be a few accidents with street photographers who are very artistic, which is what it is. And in Germany, by the way, street photography, I read a while back, has actually been deemed an art form, and therefore a pursuit of art. I've also read about the laws concerning what you can and can't do, and people are quite mixed up about it, because the average German citizen believes they know the law, and they'll start, in an orderly way, they'll start telling you all about what you can and can't do, and they'll demand that you hand over your camera that they can look through it. If you're ever on the streets, it doesn't matter where you are, London, New York, Berlin, Paris, and you're doing street photography, and somebody approaches you and says, you can't take photos of me, so let me look at your camera, give it here, I want to see if I'm in it. Tell them quite politely, no. It's that simple, because you could also say to them, well, I'll tell you what, I think you've got something in your wallet that belongs to me. I just made that up. Hand over your wallet immediately. I want to look inside of it. It's the same principle, same idea. You can't do this and they can't. Nobody can demand that you hand over your camera to them. And you keep your hand tightly wrapped around the lens and show them you didn't take a photo of them. Or if you did, be polite and just get rid of it and say, look, it's gone. That's it. You might think it's a humdinger of a photo, a lovely keeper, but it isn't yours to keep by law. The problem is that when those laws first were written up, and European Union being what it is, it came out of Brussels. Local countries and their local customs and ideas about how people live their daily lives is not actually dictated to by Brussels. Even though sometimes people think it is like that, there are many, many local laws. There are German laws here, and the German law says you can go out and take photos on the street. You can practice the art of street photography in an artistic pursuit, and therefore your photos should in fact reflect the idea that you are creating art. But if you're just snapping people's faces, you're in big trouble. As simple as that. But if you take a photo of the streets of Berlin or London or Paris or New York, this is what you are doing. You are contributing to a portfolio, a public common portfolio of street photography over more than a century's worth of work, of documenting what the streets of cities look like. Now think about it. It's the difference between the 1920s, when cities were developing in such a way they were out of control. There was no real planning, and they started calling them metropoles. They were places that were cold and harsh, and people said that they were frightening, adventurous, and they soon got the reputation that the people who lived in these cities were in fact not very friendly people. Strangely, all of these people in the 1920s, they would come up to the city to live there to experience the adventure of the city, and they probably came from the countryside where people are friendly. And the thing about it is that these cities became well known to be harsh, cold places where people are unfriendly. I went to live in London many, many years ago when I was younger, and I discovered, yeah, it's pretty cold. I tried things that people said don't do, and that is ask a person in the street for directions to go somewhere, and 9 out of 10 times the person just ignored me and carried on, or they looked at me as if maybe I've got some con trick or scam under my jumper and I'm about to con them out of something, and they just looked at me like that and disappeared. It's strange. But today, I don't know what London's like today. I live in Berlin. Berlin, if you stop a person in the street and say, could you tell me the directions to go here? You tend to find Berliners, being people from all over the world, are very open and they'll stop. I get asked questions by people, both in English, in German and in Spanish, and it gives me the opportunity to practice all my languages. The first thing I do if it's more than one person is turn. And I look behind me to see if one of their companions maybe stopped directly behind me. And sometimes they do that by mistake. And there's somebody behind me and somebody in front of me asking me questions. And so I just do a side step and face the pair of them and ask them what they want. Now, this is going into how the streets of a big city can be a place which create mistrust or a lack of trust immediately. And so you're out there doing street photography. And it's a common question among street photographers, and that is, do you feel frightened when you're out there and you want to lift the camera and take a shot of something great and people are involved? Or how do you get over the fear of street photography? And one of the things is you probably won't ever get over the fear, because when I go out to do some street photography, I very often walk out my door, walk straight down the road, and I'm going to head to the train, the underground train, which is going to take me somewhere. And I've got to admit, sometimes I have a plan and it changes on the way and I get a different train and it takes me to a different part of the city. And it's the first part of me loosening up. But as I walk down the street, and there's not much to photograph there, is that I just think, get your camera out and take 3 or 4 shots. And that way it does something, and it causes my head to get into image mode. And that is, when I'm doing street photography, I don't use words. My brain suddenly goes into like an image machine that just sops up images and balances them and looks at color and line and contrast, and it's doing that. And so just taking 3 or 4 shots as I'm walking towards the train, just trying to think, well, maybe that's interesting. There's a lot of colour in it, there's structure, and I go clink like that, and then I look and I clink like this, and across the street, and then I take a like another one, and then I don't look at them. But it does get my head into the idea of now I'm out here doing photography. The next thing is that I do feel afraid sometimes to lift the camera and take the shot when I get into very crowded spaces. You know as well as I do that, you know, when you do street photography, often you do want variety. And so sometimes, you know, I get into this idea, I want to go down to a certain part of Berlin, Hackische Höfe, where it's very cramped and there's a lot of people and there's a lot of cars and buses and trams and everything. Imagine it, and it's this big sweeping corner which bends around through all these big tall houses, and there's, you know, and the streets are not really big enough for this. So it reminds you of something that might have been something similar in the 1920s, overcrowded. But boy, is a beautiful, colourful place for a street photographer, especially in the summer when the sun's coming down and hitting colourful cars and people are wearing all types of colourful clothes. There's lots of street cafes, so there's people standing outside cafes and they're half in shadow, half out. There's a tarpaulin down, shadows and then sun, and it's bright light, and boy, is it a great place. Even, you know, just after midday you can get there and start seeing a few angles in the shadows, and then when the evening sun comes you start see the colour changing and things are popping big time. And the thing about it is this is what I find about the fear factor, is the more you feel the fear and the more you sit with it and wait and think, well, if I lift the camera, you get a feeling that if I lift the camera and take the shot, everybody's going to look around at you and say, what are you doing? Go away. But they're not. You have to be a bit challenging as a street photographer. You have to be a bit necky, and you have to have the guts to believe in something, and that is that you're doing something that is very important, and that is you're documenting a city. And the work you do, you just don't know, and nobody else knows. But if you look after it and keep it and select the real keepers of your photos into a good folder, you might just find that one day they are used to show this is what the city was like in 2025. And when they're looking at them, it could be 2050 or 60 or 70 or later. And it's like, wow, look at that. I look at photos of Berlin from when I first arrived. It was a very different place. The landscape was industrial. There was no techie stuff. There was no IT. There was no startups. Everything was family businesses everywhere. There was that thing of corporate really trying to grab the high street, but there was orderliness in the city. It's Germany. There would be. But the thing about it is it was a very different city, and it was more conservative. It's just how people were then. They were orderly, conservative, and people didn't, you know, in the streets, you didn't see as much conflict as you do now. You saw, you know, German people, you know, they didn't drink beer and then start fighting. That's English people do that. That's the way it is. But things have changed, you know. Shop signs are very uniform. They're the same bloody sign all the time. Same sign maker, grabbed that street, got contracts, put up all the signs for the shop. That sign maker is not particularly creative, and they all look pretty much the same. It would be lovely if the streets were full of shop signs above the doorway or the window, and they were yellow and they were red and they were blue, flag colours or something like that, to give it a bit of more pop. Because when you look at these old colour photos of the 1950s and 60s, you might see things like Fred Herzog of Canada, who he originated in Germany and went to Canada, and he took shots of Vancouver streets, which are wonderful, fantastic depictions of everyday life of people. His compositions show all these things, like the barber's shop with the candy cane going up, all the shop front, you know, they're wooden slatted windows, but you've got these colourful signs outside, and it just makes it a street more interesting, and it also picks up the perspective. Things change, and so what you're doing today is taking photos of things that won't be there tomorrow, as it were. The way people dress in winter and summer always changes. Here in Northern Europe, people dress drably. They wear dark colours in the winter, and then a little bit more than in the past, people are beginning to wear more colourful clothes, a bit like the Spanish do in the summertime, to reflect the light. And that's interesting. You never know when you take a photo of just an ordinary street scene that how much that ordinary street scene of maybe people sitting outside a cafe eating breakfast, and you capture the atmosphere that it's very clearly early in the morning and people are having their breakfast, that cultural idea might disappear. It might be gone. It would be an interesting photo in a time when people can't afford to go out and eat as much as they do today. Because here in Berlin, at least, the restaurants changed. Years ago, people didn't go out for breakfast. It was a very special thing to go for breakfast in Berlin. You would plan it and say, let's do that Saturday morning. That never happened in the past. It would be certain days of the week that the cafes and restaurants would begin to fill up. So when it comes to street photography, what you're doing is really something important. And don't let anybody stop you by creating fear in you, making you feel as if you shouldn't be doing it. It's none of their bloody business. And that's how it works. So that's me, Sean Durham, here in Berlin. I hope you have a wonderful weekend.